Hi and welcome to Bite-Sized Bite Rips, where we bring you great battle reports without taking up a great deal of your time. So we're kicking off the Deluge expansion this week with my first report with the new rule set, and I really wanted to show you guys one of the cool new scenarios that come with the book, but just the way the dice worked out, it ended up being one of the classics. However, I am fielding my Swedes as the Electorate of Brandenburg. It's just to mix things up, and also to avoid a mirror match, as my opponent did bring a Kingdom of Sweden army. And just to kick things off, if you look at his army build, he actually had a 9-point list, but when deploying accidentally forgot 2 rapier bases, which meant that he had an 8-point list. So the way we played it was with a 1-point advantage to me that I shouldn't have had, which really was that panic effect. Now, fortunately, the panic itself didn't break the game. However, it was still something that should not have been applied. Okay, let's get going. Here's my Brandenburg force. And here's my Swedish opponent with, you can see the pile of dragoons and 2 commanders and the gun. So that's the gun, something I'll definitely have to be watching out for. And here's the field with the 2 forage points, which are the objective of the scenario. And the opponent deployment is, as you can see, with his force split fairly evenly into the 2 camps. So for my own side, I decided to go with a really simple plan, and that's kind of the main way I've seen the scenario played, where you try to overwhelm one of the sides before moving on to the next side, and take advantage of the fact that the enemy forces are split into 2. So I put my raiders on the right flank and will basically charge into the camp and try to destroy everything as quickly as possible, while my dragoons make it for that light woods in the middle, run interference, and basically try to provide a speed bump so that the raider reinforcements from the left side can't make it onto the right side in time. Quick close-up on the left side. This is the Swedish camp with the dismounted dragoons, a captain, and 4 veterans. And the right side, which will be coming under my attack with the colonel, dismounted dragoons, regular raiders, and that 1 gun. And of course, turn 1 of the game, that gun can't be firing. That's part of the scenario setup, so I know that I'm safe charging straight at it, at least in the first turn. And here's a close-up of my Brandenburgian forces. Those guys are ready, loaded, and galloping away. Okay, we get started turn 1, so the panic effect roll gets rolled, and the dismounted dragoons on the left get the panic effect, which is why it's not so terrible for my opponent, because the camp that's under attack is not being affected. Movement, so my raiders on the right charge straight at the enemy, and my dragoons make it for the forest. Now, one of the things I noticed now that I'm looking at this report is that I didn't put my guys into a column, which would have been a faster way to get to the forest. I guess for some reason I'm just so used to deploying them in ranks that I didn't even consider putting them in a column, but there you have it. Close up on the action to be on the right side. And the Swedish moves, so the dragoons expand their frontage and move up to intercept the charging veterans. And the cannon wisely moves out of the way, so they basically manhandle the cannon back out of the range for my charging raiders, which is a great idea for them. That guarantees that the cannon will fire at least once next turn and probably do some damage. And the colonel just gets out of the way so he doesn't get overrun or caught up in the combat that's coming. And on the left side, the Swedes pull out of the camp, and the Swedish commander on the left moves so that he's still close to the camp so he can try to rally those dragoons. Otherwise he'd be, I'm sure, crossing the field. Remaining moves for the charges, so the veterans get into the raiders, and my armored raiders move up, don't catch the cannon, but they fortunately do pass their skill test, so they retain the charge order and they don't withdraw, which is a really big win for me on this side. Okay, let's get into combat. So there's some fire into the armored raiders that does a wound, and we fight 2 turns of combat between my veterans and his regular raiders. They withdraw a little bit. We fight the second round, and they end up losing 2 full bases, I lose a base, and they withdraw disorganized, which is a solid win for me, and now that flank is starting to be in trouble. End of turn 1. Okay, let's get started with turn 2. So, without any surprises, really, I throw down charge orders onto my veterans. I want to finish off those raiders that are disorganized. My armored raiders retain their charge orders, so they'll keep going forward. And unfortunately for the Swedes, the dragoons that were disorganized on the left don't rally, and the raiders on the right also don't rally. So both of his disorganized units remain panicked, which is not good. Getting into the action in turn 2, a little bit of a close-up, and you can see that the cannon now has a defense order, which does mean that it'll be firing case shots straight into my guys as they're coming at it. And bang, the chargers move up, smashing into their enemy, and the cannons will be opening fire. Now the remaining moves from my side, I put the commanders into the combat units. I want to make sure that those combats go smoothly. And then on the left, or center I should say, I push my dragoons up. Now, I decided not to put them into the forest just yet because there is really no rush to do so. The raiders on the left are just sitting around. They're not running towards that forage point on the right, so there's nothing for the dragoons to slow down or interfere with. And I'd rather keep them unoccupied and mounted so that they can either provide cover on the right if needed, or get into the forest if needed. So this is just a way to put them somewhere where they can be useful when needed. Close up on the Swedish colonel. He's sure getting a little bit nervous about those forage supplies that are about to get overrun. And a close up on the veterans on the left. So these are the Swedes sitting on the far left, just hanging out, not really rushing to support their comrades on the right side. Close up on the action. This is just before we start the major engagement of the game. Okay, so the cannon and the dragoons open up into my armored raiders, cause 2 wounds, and that does force a panic test because of the case shot, but I make the panic test. So that means the combat will proceed, and that gun is basically now as good as destroyed. On the left, we fight the first round of combat, and my veterans easily beat the disorganized raiders, even though we barely score any hits. Just with the fact that they're disorganized and outnumber them, I easily beat down their morale and force a panic. And on the left, we exchange some hits, and I destroy the cannon. But here's the funny thing: the cannon crew scored a hit against my armored raiders, and they failed their armor test and lost a base because of the previous wound. So there you have it. That cannon actually took out a base of the armored raiders. And in the remaining charge moves, I move into the dragoons. We fight a round of combat, and they break as well. So the right side is now completely occupied by my forces, and that forage point is going to get destroyed at the end of the turn. So the right side for the Swedes has fled, and I'm now done with half of the scenario's objectives. Okay, let's kick off turn 3. So the good news for the Swedes is that they actually rally both of their units. So the dragoons rally up top, and the raiders rally towards the left into a column so that they can make it towards their comrades on the left side. And for me, there's nothing else for me to do in this forage point, so just throw some move orders on these guys and we'll be getting them left. And of course, on the left side for the Swedes, those dragoons that were disorganized are still disorganized, so they're not going anywhere or doing anything useful. Quick close-up of my guys, and okay, the movements for the third turn, so I basically move left, and my dragoons get into the forest finally and dismount, losing their horses. The guy's galloping out of the camp. And the Swedish colonel is kind of circling around, trying to protect his flank and get the heck back into action on the left side and see if he can salvage that other forage point. And that's it. So turn 4. Not much difference. We basically make some moves. So the Swedes move left towards their forage point. I chase them also left. reposition my Dragoons, and that's pretty much all that happens. On to turn 5, and I decide not to charge with my either of my Rater companies, because I know up top my Raters won't catch his fleeing Raters because he gets the initiative, so he'll just move out of the way. And at the bottom, I would be able to possibly catch them if he didn't move, but I just don't like the odds with my 3 bases versus the veterans. Only 2 wide. So I get the move orders and we'll just be reacting to his movements. Now he withdraws, goes left to support his forage point, and for me, I decide that now is the time to pick up those Dragoons at the top right. They're basically standing there without any orders, just begging to be run down. So I turn my Raters around and chase them down. And there you go, that's the end of turn 5. Quick close-up. You can just see how those poor Dragoons are getting nervous, seeing that massive cavalry charging straight at them, and then without their commander telling them how to react, just milling about, trying to get ready. Okay, turn 6, this is it, last turn of the game, so we both decide to just kind of go for it. It's there's not much more that we can do. So up top, obviously, I'll be charging those Dragoons, and up at the bottom, now I'm kind of liking my odds a little bit better, because even though I'm 3-4 versus veterans, I'm 3 wide, he's 2 wide, and I have armor, so I think that I actually have a decent shot at doing well in that combat, or at least even match. We fight, smash into each other, fight 2 rounds, back and forth, and both end up losing a base and withdrawing in good order. And up top, my Raters make contact with those Dragoons and end up killing them outright in combat without losing a base. So that was the perfect result for that. Close up at the top victorious veterans, and the Swedish veterans after withdrawing from combat in good order, just sitting around. And my Dragoons in the forest. They actually haven't had to do much this game, but they did provide that linchpin which prevented my enemy from maneuvering, which was actually quite nice. And there you have it. That's the game. So one of the new sections, starting with some of these videos, are the turning points. This is the parts of the game that I think really decided the outcome. And for this game, for me, it's turn 2 when I took the case shot into my armored Raters, and they were forced to take a panic test, and they passed. Had they failed it, I think it would have been the only point at which this game could have really been turned around, because they would have withdrawn, given the cannon another shot into my other Rater group, which also might have withdrawn, which might have allowed my opponent the time to rally his forces and mount some sort of a defense of that forage point while bringing his forces in from the left side. And at least it wouldn't have been as much of a blowout in terms of losses on that right side. And the other fun part of these videos is going through the game and taking a look at it and thinking about the plays I've made and if there were any other alternatives that I had and how they might have played out. So the interesting what-if scenario for me is this: at the end of the game, it wouldn't really have changed the outcome of the game, but it's more of a mini tactical thing. So I decided to charge with my armored Raters into his Raters, very straightforward, just your 2-horse units smashing into each other. But because we were putting down orders and I knew he was changing his orders, so charging, what would happen if I decided to defend and then withdraw? This would have been one of those defensive plays where he would have charged, not made it in the first movement, and then taken a ton of dice from fire from both my defending Raters with their pistols and flank shots from my Dragoons in the forest. Probably would have lost a base and might have been forced to withdraw, which would have been basically a free casualty base. And even if then he did make contact and didn't withdraw, then we would have fought combat on even terms then, because he would have been 3 bases to 3 with impact, but I would have had an extra base, so I still would have felt really good about the combat and coming out on top of in it. In any case, it's sometimes fun to think about those alternative plays. Okay, end of the game. So how did we do for losses? Well, there you go. And for the actual points, I destroyed one of the forage points for 2, and suffered acceptable losses for 1 point, whereas my opponent suffered heavy losses, losing 7 of his stands. which is 3-0, which is a tactical victory. And there you have it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, and see you next time on Bite-Sized Bat Revs.